Diane and Wiiritjin. Would you like to introduce yourselves, guys, and talk to the viewers here about whom you are, why you are here, and whom the Kabi Kabi people are? What's going on?
Yeah, around everybody. This is Wiiritjin here. I'm part of the Kabi Kabi tribe that comes from, well, I'm originally Kabi tribe from the Sunshine Coast and Wide Bay areas. We are descendants from, well, our history says from Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, and that was the site we were trying to protect on the Jackie Kundu, the Gippy Pyramid, so they say. And our fight is with the government, because they're putting all these imposters in, pretending they're Kabi people when they're not. They clearly come from other areas, other tribal areas in Australia, and this is what the government does. It brings in these foreign people in to sign off on everything, to destroy everything, and then once we've lost our culture, then we don't belong to the land. We're not attached to the land. So...
Well, I'm Diane, and I've been working with Wiiritjin since 2013, when Kabi elders asked me if I would like to be a part of the fight to protect sacred sites, and Wiiritjin and I were appointed to be guardians of the sacred site of Jackie Kundu and do everything we could to protect it in 2013 at a meeting of about 200 or so Kabi tribal representatives. But since that time, other people who claim to be Kabi seem to have done everything they could to allow the sacred site and other sacred sites to be destroyed. So it's been a pretty difficult fight, and of course the government has managed to destroy a large part of Jackie Kundu, only leaving a small part of the surface area intact.
Okay.
And we're still fighting to preserve that area.
Yeah, and it's very much a focal point of this area. And around that is the Bunya Proclamation, correct? Can you explain to us what is the Bunya Proclamation, and what has that got to do with the Kabi people of this region?
Well, the British were given laws, when to do treaties and everything, particularly when in New Zealand. And so that transferred on to the 1942 Bunya Proclamation, when Petrie, he come up to Maloney there, and he saw the first Bunya gathering, which had law, they had games, they had feasting, they had everything to say it was a civilization. And so he went back to Governor Gibbs. He was the governor of New South Wales at that stage. And he said, well, these people have law and everything like that, we can't go in. So then Queen Victoria and that told them they need to write the Bunya Proclamation. So that was done in 1842 in April. It was put in the Government Gazette, and it states in there that, it's gone out of my mind.
They weren't allowed to settle anywhere north of Moreton Bay, which was the penal colony at the time. Wherever there were bunya trees, they weren't allowed to cut trees, and anyone in unlawful settlement was to be removed by the Crown Commissioners of Land. But that didn't exactly happen. So they were breaking their own laws by not removing people who had encroached on the bunya districts.
So where are the bunya districts? Do you have a map of this for people to see?
Yes, there's a map that we've shared with you of Russell's map, which shows the Bunya Bunya Country. The Bunya Proclamation was made in 1842, and the map was published in 1845 by Henry Stuart Russell, who is one of the people that was sent in to explore the extent of the Bunya districts. And when he wrote his report, he published this map. It seems that the map was made sometime earlier, probably in 1843, although we've had trouble actually accessing a copy of the first publication of the map. But this is a copy of the publication from Henry Stuart Russell's paper in 1845, and you'll see there in the area of the Mary River, though the Mary River is not mapped on there because they hadn't been in there surveying or mapping. It says Bunya Bunya, or Bunya Bunya is the way they pronounced it. It says Bunya Bunya Country.
Ah, yes, I see it here. So now can you see that all okay? Is the map clear for you?
Yes,
Yep,
it's fine to us. Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. So that was what was mapped at the time. And so in essence, if you were to say to somebody that's uneducated and doesn't know about this in a couple of sentences, and they were to go, what is it? What would you say to them to help them to comprehend what this really means?
Well, essentially, it's a map of acknowledging the area that they knew they weren't allowed to settle because it was already settled and it already had a system of law. So under international law, that precluded the Crown from claiming the land or allowing settlement without consent of the tribes that lived on that country.
Okay, very good. So, in fact, that's been ignored, but it would seem.
To a degree, because directly after it, after the Bunya Proclamation was made, there was a Land Act to do with settlement on unsettled lands. And there's a provision in that Land Act that states that they had to abide by previous promises and engagements regarding land. So therefore, it held up the Bunya Proclamation and the fact that no one was allowed to settle on that land because it was unsettled by the Crown. So they couldn't allow people to settle under the terms of that Land Act. And they just allowed people to sneak in, basically, without formally settling.
Well, this is very interesting. Is there anywhere else in this continent of Terrace Australis where this happens or has occurred, this type of proclamation?
Not that we know.
Not that we know of. There were other agreements where they made reserves that people weren't allowed to enter into, and then some of them were honoured and some weren't. But the Bunya Proclamation is the only one of its kind that we've found.
That makes it rather unique for this area, doesn't it, and for the continent in general?
Well, it's so significant for everybody, particularly First Nation people that live in that area, because then you bring all the other laws into place, like the Pacific Island Protection Act and the Pacific Order, and the Pacific Order states an area, a latitude and longitude, and the Bunya Proclamation is inside of that area also.
Well, this is actually the map.
Coordinate, latitude and longitude. Yeah. It goes way east out towards Fiji, around Fiji and that. So the
area, it shows the area of most of Queensland and the northern part of what's now New South Wales. And in the Pacific Order, it states that in this area, the Crown did not claim sovereignty or dominion over any of the native tribes. So they'd already precluded settlement on the Bunya districts. It was upheld in several land acts. The Pacific Islanders Protection Act also stated in Section 7 that the Crown saved the rights of the tribes, and that was repeated in the Pacific Order. So this area that's mapped was the area where the Crown never claimed sovereignty or dominion over any of the lands in this area that were already occupied by tribal peoples with a system of law.
Yeah, and that was for her heirs and successors too, Di.
Yes, that's right. And this was written in 1893. So that's 7 years before the Crown wrote the Constitution Act in the UK for the federal Federation of States to become the Commonwealth of Australia. So it's only 7 years before. She was not claiming any of the land that was already settled and under tribal law. And guess what happened?
See, it also says in the Commonwealth Constitution, section 51(26), that because of the Pacific Order, well, it says they couldn't make laws for the Aboriginal race. And in section 21(27), they weren't allowed to count the Aboriginal race. So it just shows that...
Do we have that? Sorry, do we have that document?
No.
No. Sorry, I didn't upload that. I can. It's the Commonwealth Constitution.
Okay, Commonwealth Constitution, is that the 1900 one before it was gazetted in 1901? Is that the one?
Well, it's probably good to look at both of them if you care to take a look, because the UK Constitution document shows that New Zealand was to be included, because New Zealand was actually part of the state of New South Wales at the time, the colony of New South Wales. But New Zealand decided to be a self-governing colony because their politicians didn't want to travel across the ditch to attend Parliament. So nothing was ever formally done to ensure that New Zealand was separate to Australia, and essentially it's still a self-governing colony. But the Constitution was never actually properly ratified, assented to by the Crown, because Queen Victoria died before she could sign it, and her successor did not sign it.
Right. Okay, so there's a few variables there. So this is leading up to what you've spoken to me about previously, and what's happening on the 16th of April of this year, very soon. What's going on?
Well, it's the native title. They want to sign all the land over to the government, to a private corporation. And then once that happens, and plus when you got all these false Kabi people pretending they're Kabi and ignoring the real Kabi people like us and taking control over our land. We just don't want to be a part of that system. That's why we're trying to step back and keep doing what we're doing here. Like Macca's, they can only make rules and regulations, and all they're doing is making a corporate contract. And we don't want to be part of that contract. So we still have our sovereignty and we still own our land.
So is it true to say that if these the native title acts, if they actually go ahead, the people, those that you say are not the Kabi, and you've got proof of this, correct? Is that correct?
Yep.
Yes.
We're actually trying to get a meeting with Sandy Bolton to show her everything, that these people aren't Kabi.
Okay. So if they do sign this, is it true that they are agreeing that they are not claiming any of the land in this particular area?
I'm not sure. It's just all they're after is money. That's all they're after.
They're signing it over to the government, basically. They're going, you can have it, we're not interested. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
Yes, and then once they've done that, well, yous won't have any... Normal citizens, Australian citizens, won't have any control over their land because the government can come and take it off at any time. See, we're the linchpin to holding everybody's land to their ownership, really, because if they don't have contract with us, they can't do nothing internationally.
See, the Crown and the government can take land off people anytime if people think they're Australian citizens and they own the land under Australian law. Well, then the Crown claims right to take land at any time and also claims right to take resources at any time. And the only thing that can really stop that is tribal people's rights over their own land. But at the moment, even though people have rights, the government is ignoring a lot of them. But there is the Queensland Human Rights Act in force now. And when we were in court trying to prove the ownership of the land before they threw the court case out, the only thing that made a big impression on the magistrate, well, two things. One was the fact that the Governor of Queensland and the Governor-General were summoned to provide transfer of title from Witbooker's Kabi ancestors to the Crown. Neither of them could provide it. And the other thing was that there is a Queensland Rights Act that binds all persons according to the Act, including police, government and the judiciary. So that's a really important thing.
Diane, could you repeat that act again? You just started fading out a little bit with the internet then.
The Queensland Human Rights Act, which came into force in 2020, I think. There was a bill in 2019.
Yeah.
Came into force in 2020. And since that time, most people don't even know it exists. And they don't know that it says that police and courts and government and everybody has to take notice of people's rights. And Section 28, which you're showing now, specifically refers to cultural rights, acknowledging that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have special rights to enjoy and maintain their culture and land, even to use it, to protect sacred places, to earn an income on it. And basically, those rights aren't being upheld unless people force people to uphold them. If people don't know they have rights and don't assert them, peacefully, of course, well, those rights are always trampled on.
Absolutely.
But the Human Rights Act has a lot of other rights that most people don't know they have. And I think everyone watching this who lives in the state called Queensland needs to read it.
That's another point there. When we go to court and that, we don't say we were in Queensland. We say that we're Kabi Bunya Country. So that's Kabi Bunya Country, because they weren't allowed to come into Kabi Bunya Country, the Bunya Proclamation. So since Queensland's not there. So they need to acknowledge that also.
What is the recourse here? What is it that we need to see happening? What would you like to see happening? What are you asking for from those that are now awake to the truth?
Well, they need to have a look at the evidence and just study it a bit to make sure we're right, because, every now and then people are wrong, and then come and join us in what we're doing. And we're trying to make a world for living men and women. We call it Wiiritjin, black fella and white fella working together and having the same respect for each other, because this private corporation, it doesn't work. The Australian government, this Queensland government doesn't work for anybody. They can take anything off you at any time. They take away all your rights. And so we want to be a living, free state, which we already are, Kabi people, because that's why they can't make laws for us, because under UN laws, they can't make laws for another state anyway.
We've actually written to the Foreign Affairs Department, and the Governor-General regarding the fact that they have no lawful standing here, are asking for a meeting to sort out the problems. And of course, we haven't had an answer. We also wrote to the Foreign Affairs Department of the UK. As usual, these things are being ignored. And I think the only way that we're going to be able to have people take notice is if people educate themselves and stand together. And also the other option is taking this to a higher court. And that's what we're discussing with lawyers. There are some lawyers who have approached us with the financial backing to take this matter into the civil realm. And there's less chance that it will be ignored.
Right, okay.
If we can get into the High Court especially.
Very good.
Well,
So
we're looking for people that are interested in helping us. That's what we're looking for, because we're not sure with the people we've got at the moment. So we need to have a few quotes or whatever to see what they can do for us.
It would be good to get some extra advice. That's, I mean, these people that have approached us seem perfectly adequate. They certainly have the financial means to run this case. However, it would be good to get other opinions because, two heads are better than one.
Absolutely. So somebody who can work with you and going through the system to the high court level and representing your case. Do you need to go to Palaszczuk and the Governor General of Queensland? Would you like to speak to both around this?
We've tried to speak to all of them many times and they just ignore things, or you get a copy-paste letter back that says nothing. So they really should engage with Wiiritjin, because Wiiritjin has presented them with the facts now since 2013, and they're just sticking their head in the sand.
So they're ignoring you because you're a hot potato, Wiiritjin. You're too hot to handle.
2015, we reasserted sovereignty on the 26th of July at Mimbiri in the Mary Valley. And so we notified the police, we notified Anastasia, we notified the federal governments that we were doing this. And so the police came out. John Lewis, he's a police inspector for Noosa, he came out and had an interview with myself and Di, and we had to agree to disagree. So he said we'd be arrested when we turned up to Mimbiri to reassert our sovereignty. But they just drove past, waving to us. So, and then Anastasia, she sent a letter back saying she's
understood,
of an understanding of our efforts to self-determinate. So, she's really saying that she's really understanding that we're starting to self-determinate on our country. We don't need them.
So there's some agreement there, and also your court case recently was a very important precedent. Is that correct? Would you like to briefly summarise what happened with that?
Well, since 2015, I've been arrested 5 times for trespass, trying to protect sacred sites and do ceremonies. And every time they drag it out for 6 months, and then they throw it out. Now, at the Jackie Kundu, they dragged it out for nearly a year and a half, and they know they don't have the evidence, they don't have the bill of sale or the treaty with us, so they had to throw it out. And this is the trouble, there's nowhere to go for them, because they know we know. It's just, when are they going to listen?
Yeah, if they'd have allowed our case to go all the way through, they already realised they could not charge us with trespass on tribal land because they knew there was no provenance for the claims of trespass. And they didn't want the whole story coming out in court. But despite that, they're still behaving as if they still own the land. It's genocide.
Yeah.
You know, people think genocide is just killing people. It's not. It's preventing people from practicing their culture and their spiritual and religious beliefs, and causing them great mental anguish while they're doing that to First Nation people all over this land.
Yeah, well, if you go to the Criminal Code, 1995, Section 268.1, and go on from there, it shows you what genocide is. There's a number of things that, even just harming people of their beliefs is genocide these days. So, and that's what they're doing. They're destroying our sites and harming us with our belief system. So it's genocide, really.
I mean, essentially this voice, the voice they're trying to bring into Parliament is really the final way of trying to assimilate people. Now, assimilation is a form of genocide. Once they write people into the Constitution, they then become Australian citizens. And the government, the next step is saying, well, you're just like everyone else. We can't discriminate between you and everyone else, so you don't have any more rights than anyone else. It's a slippery slope, really.
Yeah, it's all part of a long-term plan by the sounds of it.
Yes, it is. And it's genocidal. It's cultural genocide.
But it's, they keep carrying on from Julia Gillard. They wanted to recognise us in their constitution in 2013, and they couldn't get that through. So now they've come along to the voice. And so once, no matter what people vote for, it's still going to come in because everything gets manipulated now because through the system. So we'll have lost our attachment to the land, and then they'll be able to go to one world government.
Yeah, well, only according to them, because it's going to be unlawful. One nation can't write people of another nation into their legal system without their permission. I mean, they're belligerent occupiers and they're behaving as if they own the land when their own sovereign said that they didn't.
Yeah. See, with the voice, all First Nation people, well, they need a referendum themselves. So they have every individual, because that's what all the Australian citizens have. They all have an individual voting right. So why doesn't the First Nation people have an individual voting right? It's discrimination, it is.
About the Crown, I mean, King Charles and, I mean, this was if we go back to the Bunya Proclamation, that was something that was signed by Charlie's great-grandmother. And now it's been roughshod.
Is there anyone out there who has a direct line to Prince Charles? Because if there is, we'd like to meet them. We've sent letters to the palace and they have just been ignored.
They send you a reply.
Yeah, it's just a generic reply saying, at this time, the Queen, the last letter, at this time, the Queen will not intervene. And you need to take it up with the Governor-General and the politicians, the Parliament. And they don't do anything. They won't even speak with us.
But we did take it up with the Governor-General in the last court case. And he brought barristers in and the Governor of Queensland, and they said they had no bill of sale or treaty. Now, every corporation needs a contract. And if they can't show where their contract comes from, well, it's null and void. They've overreached their powers, as the High Court says.
That's all the evidence you need, surely, that, the precedent was set, the case was made. Surely at that point, that should be your leeway into High Court proceedings.
That's the trouble with First Nation.
It is.
Yeah, First Nation people can't get to the High Court because they stop it. in so many different cases around Australia, they're having trouble trying to get to the High Court because the Australian government don't want it up there because they know what will happen.
Well, you see, this affects all of us. This affects the whole of this. If we look at it, this particular beautiful area of Gympie, Kabi Kabi, the Bunya area, then we extend that out to Queensland. This affects everybody who's living on the land here at this time. You know, absolutely. And in the spirit of Wiiritjin, then we all need to be standing up and speaking about this.
Yeah, this is probably the only place in the world where we could all stand up together and hold this government or this entity back, this UN government. Because it's all, you know, we all come together.
Queensland legislation at the moment says that a paper title deed is no proof of ownership of land. So if a paper title deed is no proof of ownership of land, the only proof of ownership is what is in the government computers. And the government is now making a deal with native title applicants to claim that they own most of the land. Where does that put all the people who think they have a title deed to the land that they're living on in the Bunya districts? Wiiritjin Booker and his family, the Kabi tribe, have said since 2013 that I know of, and maybe before, that they weren't interested in kicking people off their land. And if people have a title deed, Wiiritjin Booker and his family are happy for people to regard the land as theirs to live on, even though they don't really own it. You know.
And all we really want is access to, if there's any sacred there, and protect our country. That's all we're really interested in.
Yeah, protect the environment and protect sacred sites.
Okay.
But the government doesn't do either of those things, do they?
No, the government's not done that at all, of course. In fact, they want to.
I mean, how long before no one will have clean water to drink? And there are mining exploration leases underneath all the ground. Once these native title applicants sign off, they'll be wanting to pop up with mines everywhere. They're already trying to push ahead with the Barumba Dam Hydro Project, the Puna Lake Cabins, and the wind farm. And what's going to be next? There's plans for manganese mining and all sorts of other things, and gas fracking. They've done experimental tests for that for quite a number of years in the state forest. So it's not looking good. People don't stand up.
It's absolutely. So is this why they're making these giant motorways, these highways, and nothing to do with us?
Yeah.
Well, it's to increase speed of long haulage transport and to allow heavy vehicles to travel over the roads, because the previous highways were pretty bad, and you know, they like to be able to travel freely and quickly, and they don't care about people or accidents. It's only about doing business.
It's all the same thing. They're all just destroying everybody's environment. That's what they're doing. You know, they don't care. It's all about money and business, and they don't care about the living men and women that lives on country. And all we're doing is standing up to preserve our rights of being tribal people and preserving our culture and everything else, doing our stuff on our country. And it shouldn't be stopped, which they're doing it to us. So,
yeah, they acknowledge Kabi rights. They acknowledge all Aboriginal people have specific rights, but then they do nothing to allow people to assert them. And they do everything to trample on people's rights. As we found when, you know, we were charged again to Jackie Kundu and dragged through court for about a year and a half, only to have any sense of justice thrown out the window when they dropped all the charges or discontinued all the charges because they claimed it was in the interest of the community.
Because the community didn't need to know what the truth was.
Mm-hmm.
So, but under the Native Title Act, anyway, they're supposed to follow native title law or native law, and they're not. They're just dismissing it and they're manipulating it. So, everything they're doing is they've overreached their powers. But until we can get them in court, they're going to keep doing it.
Mm. Okay, well, I think that's been pretty comprehensive, actually. There's a lot to mull over, and particularly the documentation and different things that you've shared here. But I think for anybody that's interested in having a comprehension of what's really going on, I think what's going on in this particular region, in this area, in this country, is really a focal point. It's very key. It's a very key area up for discussion and up for resolution. And if anybody's denying that, then I don't think they're actually seeing what's in place within the paperwork, within the opportunity to peruse that paperwork and see what's really going on here. It's an important area.
Yeah, a lot of what the people say, barristers or solicitors, and they say, oh, this has been repealed or that's been repealed, but they can never be repealed because they're Crown Acts. And in the Act Shortening Acts, 1852 and 1867, well, if anything needs to be repealed, it has to be expressly repealed. So if it's not expressly repealed, it's not repealed. And any rights in those acts have to go to the future acts. So, and if those future acts aren't done, well, the previous act stands. So, there's no way they can get out of it. And if the Crown says it's a final decision, like the Constitution says you can't make laws for the Aboriginal race, it's a final decision. If we don't have sovereignty or dominion over the land, and neither will my heirs or successors, that's a final decision. So they can't go against that because that's a final decision. It says that in 1852 or the 1867 Act Shortening Acts. So they're stuck.
It looks like that, and I think they're stuck in many, many ways, but unless people stand up and hold them to task, they'll just keep riding roughshod, and this is what they've been doing for a long time now. So do you want us to have a look at the tribal boundaries, Diane?
Yes, I know that a lot of the people who are listening here are very interested in spiritual things. That map was made by Norman Tyndale in the 1940s, I think. And if you look at it, this land, the Bunya districts, is the place where the elders say life began. The seven sisters from the Pleiades came to this planet and seeded life using people that were already here, according to tribal law. This is what happened. Well, if you look down the coast of Queensland, you'll see an arm, a wrist, and a hand pointing. You might have to look at it pretty hard at first, but you'll see down the coast. It even looks like there's a sleeve on there, and that there's the pointer finger comes down. Yes, you're at the bottom of the finger. You can see the thumb. You can see all the fingers there. It's a hand that is made with it's a topographical map. So that shows what tribal people call the hand of the creator, or the hand of God, if you want to use that term, pointing to the area where life began, and that's the Bunya districts. It starts around Wiiritjin area, I think, or a bit higher up than that, and it includes all the area where if you look over to the right, you'll see Fraser Island off the coast. It's a bit faint when you see it this size. Down a little bit, you'll see Fraser Island there, roughly. Yes, and so it points to the area of the Bunya districts as being where life began. So that's quite an extraordinary thing that the topography makes a hand pointing to a place that under tribal tradition life began, isn't it?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's I think people find that really interesting. And I've heard you mention this before, yourself and Whitbook, and it's very, very interesting. And it does, and we do have a lot of people who await their spiritual knowing and are marrying that up with the logistical and the other information that's coming through. A lot of people, the divine feminine, divine masculine coming together, bringing through that left and right part of the brain so that we have the overall comprehension. We're not just one way or the other. And I think it's an important part of fact finding is having that intuitive and spiritual side coming on in so that we know for ourselves what rings true. Very, very much so.
Well, that's what Kabi Kabi means, is a group of girls in the 80s. That's what it means. We had an old clever man. He got sent up to Mapoon. He was Kabi Kabi one. And the newspaper up in Cairns interviewed him in the early 1900s, and he was stating all this stuff. You know, Kabi Kabi's Pleiades. It's a group of girls. What it is. So that's where we're from.
Seven sisters.
So,
yeah, it's amazing how much you can find historically to support what has been passed down for generations through elder knowledge.
It's across many Indigenous groups throughout our planet. And for myself as a spiritual being, I know that the Pleiades helped seed our DNA at a very important time in our so-called history. They were there supporting with their particular credentials of truth and love and seeding and helping us to expand into a higher consciousness as living men and women, soul beings on this planetary realm. And that's something that's really prevalent in the spiritual nuances that I've explored.
Well, I think you'll find that story all over the world, in Hawaii, North America, South America, Africa.
Absolutely.
Well, we're actually connected to South America. You know, they're just finding out now DNA from Australian Aboriginals. All those people in the Amazon, they're all related to. So, you know, when no one didn't want to follow law from when we were given law in the beginning, they had to move out. And that's how we say the rest of the world got populated. But now we're saying everyone's starting to come back. So we need to come together.
Well, we do indeed. Okay, guys. Well, we've been talking for a wee while now. Is there anything you'd like to finish up with? I'd just like to thank you both anyway for being sharing your knowledge, sharing your wisdom, and speaking as you always have done for many years now, but also speaking here on Staying Awake, and which we're going to be sharing around to all and sundry so that people get a comprehension of what's happening and be able to talk about that. And also to bring in, hopefully, some of the minds and the expertise that you need to take this further, which I think is really important. Is there anything you'd like to wind up with, either of you, Whitbook or Diane?
You know, I'd just like to say that we give no consent to the voice to Parliament, and the treaty, Queensland want a treaty with us, and the way they act and destroy our sites, and they're only a private corporation anyway, and you can't have it. a treaty with a private corporation. You have to have it with the Crown. So there's no way we can until things start changing. They proved that at the Jack Kundu.
Yep, no consent. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's it.
Mm.
Thank you very much, Heather, for speaking with us. And yes, you're always supportive of people doing the right thing. Thank you.
It's an
Thanks,
honour and a
Heather.
pleasure. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
Okay, Bona Whoopin.
Bona Whoopin.